Sri Radha Krishna Go Gopinath Sam Kund Radha Kund Giri Giri Jai Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Navadvip Dham Ki Jai Ganga Mai Ki Jai Jamuna Mai Ki Jai Guru Dwarka Dham Ki Jai Swami Bhaktivind Ki Jai. All glories to that. All glories to that. Thank you very much.
Hare Krishna. Hope all of you can hear me and see my screen.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Yes.
Hare Krishna. Welcome, everybody. It's Friday evening, just before the long weekend. So, especially for those who are in the US, thank you for joining. So, we'll continue with our conversation from last time. I believe we had just started discussing verse number 40. So we'll continue from there. So I'll recite the verse again and then read the translation, and we'll continue with the conversation. So this is in chapter 3. We've been discussing Karma Yoga, and after Krishna elaborates on the topic of Karma Yoga, why one should do one's prescribed duties, why is it important to do one's own duty according to one's own nature, even if those are not executed perfectly, rather than to do somebody else's duty perfectly, right? So after that discussion is over, Arjuna is asking a follow-up question, similar to a follow-up question he asked at the end of second chapter. At the end of the second chapter, Arjuna was interested in knowing what the qualities are of a person who is self-realized, right? How does he walk? How does he talk? And at the end, toward the end of chapter 3, Arjuna is asking a similar question with the flip side of it. Why is it that one is not able to follow dharma? Why one acts against one will to commit sinful activities? And in response, Krishna replies saying that it is lust on thee by which one is forced to act as if impelled by a strong, strong force which is against one's will, even though somebody knows it's the right thing to do, one acts nevertheless. So in the next verse, Krishna is elaborating further. Hey, if you want to conquer the lust, you need to understand where does the lust reside, right? So lust has actually occupied various strategic positions within our body. So our body is compared to a city of 9 gates. This metaphor appears in Srimad Bhagavatam. Right, so there are 9 gates are basically various organs or openings through which you have either knowledge that is coming in or things that which are effusing out. Like all our gates, they produce some sort of mucus from eyes or nose, mouth, right? And you have evacuatory and reproductive organs. So they're all gates. There are 9 gates in the body. So when you take the analogy of a city, a city of 9 gates, and city also has other strategic positions which refer to the mind, intelligence, and the senses itself. So in this particular verse number 40, Krishna is saying the senses, mind, and intelligence are the sitting places of this lust. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him, right? So if you want to conquer an enemy, we have to understand how the enemy is operating. If the enemy has acquired various strategic positions, we have to understand what those positions are, why they are strategically important, how those, what is the relevance, how those positions function. So the first thing is the senses, we are all familiar with, but then there are biological senses are just a covering on top of the subtle senses. So the subtle body itself also has the knowledge acquiring senses and the working senses. I've given this example in the past, where just like a hand, which can, you can put different kind of gloves on the hand depending on what we are trying to do. We could have biking gloves, we could have workshop gloves, golfing gloves, winter gloves, right? So many different, depending on the action that we want to perform, but the hand still is the same. Similarly, different biological bodies are meant to enjoy different kind of sense enjoyments. There are certain kind of sense enjoyments which are can be more efficiently achieved in a particular kind of biological body versus another. So these biological senses, they sit on top of the subtle senses. Subtle senses, they carry on from one life to another life, but these biological senses sit on top of it. For instance, somebody has the proclivity to sleep for a long time. Well, how much can you sleep in a human body? But in a body of a bear, one can hibernate for a long time, right, throughout the entire winter. Similarly, consuming flesh and eating flesh, there's only so much. Human body is not really efficient for doing it. One has to hunt, and then you have to use tools to chop the meat, and then it has to be cooked first, and even then to digest, one has to consume liquor, and it's just a lot of work. But a body of a carnivore can easily do that without all these elaborate arrangements, and they can easily digest and consume and enjoy. We can go on, there are many examples. So those are the senses, right? And then you have the 5 working senses and the 5 knowledge acquiring senses. I hope all of you are familiar with that. We have discussed this many times. Tongue is one sense which is both a working sense and a knowledge acquiring sense. Working sense because the tongue can speak, right? Speaking is a kind of a work. Speech can inspire people. There are good orators who speak and bring about a revolution, right? If you take all different leaders, Martin Luther King, right, different politicians, just by their speaking power, they can infuse masses to act. create revolutions. So speaking is definitely a function. The tongue is also a knowledge acquiring sense. By tongue, we can taste the 6 different kind of tastes which are present, right? So you have the sweet, sour, salty, pungent, and then you have astringent and bitter, right? So all different kind of 6 different kind of tastes. So uh, that's a unique sense, which is both a working and a knowledge acquiring sense. As I say, the one who can control the tongue can control all senses. Okay, now talking about mind, we briefly discuss about mind, and then first of all, we have to understand what is mind. How does the mind function? So in that regard, I had made a statement last time that mind is a repository of a priori ideas. And so a priori, what does that mean? Well, what is priori? Uh, so yeah, a priori refers to something that exists in exist without any cause, right? It's already existing or innate, right? So that is priori. So it's a repository of different ideas which exist without any cause. Well, how do you understand that? So it might not be very clear or obvious. So we'll do an exercise just to kind of understand what does that mean. So let me begin with a question. You'd have it as an interactive session. That if you talk about numbers, you can pick up any number, for instance, right? Let's say 5, or could be any number or numbers in general. Are numbers a concept or are they a thing, right? So I hope all of you understand. I mean, it is pretty clear, but like concept is an idea, right? And then idea reside in your mind, but a thing is something tangible, right? That you perceive by one or more of the 5 knowledge acquiring senses. So that would be a thing, as opposed to an idea that simply resides in the mind. Now there are things there could be, ideas are also related to things, right? And there is a thing and there is an idea of that thing, right? And so in that case, the idea resides in the mind and thing resides outside of the mind. But when you're talking about numbers specifically, what do you think? Are numbers a concept or are they a thing? By the way, there were 2 Greek mathematicians or philosophers rather. They wrote a 3-volume book. It's called Principia Mathematica, which just trying to answer this question: are numbers ideas or are they things? So anyone would like to share what your opinion is? Are numbers an idea or are they a thing?
Uh, in my opinion, that was a concept which was accepted by the proof, and then we take it as a strong foundation for our further thought process.
Okay, so you're saying it's a concept derived from a proof, and then okay, so let's see what others have to say, and then we will dive into that response a little bit more in depth. Nitin Prabhu, you're trying to say something?
Yes, Prabhuji. I mean, something similar to what Maulik Prabhu said. So it could have probably started as a concept, but then now when we are saying that, okay, I have 2 children, so now that number has become a thing. When I am saying, okay, these are my 2 kids, so 1 and 2. But initially, this would have been a concept.
Okay, so you're saying it was an idea first, but then that idea was associated with a thing. And then Maulik, what did you say? Did you say the same thing? It was you mentioned something about theory or a proof. And so are you saying that there were things and then the idea was derived from the things? Or was it an idea and then that idea got associated with things?
So I mean, initially maybe somebody would have thought or imagined that this could be an idea to maybe describe that particular items or anything. So initially a concept, later when they put a thought on it, and then there is a proof, so then it becomes a concept.
So you're saying idea, then you associate with things, then it becomes a proof, and then a concept. Or you mean, I guess you mean a theory that you could use.
Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone else has to add to it? Parul, Ben, Sai?
Well, for me, I actually have the opposite thought process, right? Like there are facts, and there are certain facts, and they're proven through theories and different ways to ensure that the facts remain intact in terms of. And I think this is where, if you think about theories, right? How do you prove 2 is a 2, right? How do you prove 3 is a 3, right? There's theories that you can walk through that will prove that 2 is a 2. I think for me, the concept is things like 0 and infinity are conceptual ideas, right, that represent either nothing or everything, right? So for me, numbers, but that's, I think, coming from an engineering background, these are facts, right? So
when you say facts, is again, does it, are you saying they exist priori, like, it's that's what they call, not a postulate, but yeah, it's
yeah, I mean, you may not call them the numbers, right? But like the fact that the cell divides and becomes from 1 to 2, right? And from 2 to 4 and 4 to 6, right? I mean, these are, whether you put number count or not, the count existed. What you call that count may be different, but the fact that you multiply things or you add things exist. Even
okay.
in
So now,
way,
okay, yeah, that's a good point. So now there are three concepts. So one is an idea, and there is a name associated with the idea, and then there is in the actual object. So those are 3 different things now. You see what I'm saying? For instance, when you say chair, right? So it's an object. So chair is a name, but it's a name associated with an idea, and an idea is where a piece of furniture on which one can sit, right? So it's an idea. It might not have a name, first of all. So that at the most primitive level, it's an idea, right? A concept. And then you put associated name with that idea. So you vocalize it, right? A vocalized concept is sound, right? That's how Sankhya defines what a name is, or sabda is. Sabda is basically vocalization of an idea. And when you vocalize something, you give a name to it that is perceived only by one sense, which is the sense of hearing. Now, when the information gets denser, that means that so idea is even subtler. It's not even vocalized, but when you vocalize, it becomes name. It's perceived by one of the sense organs, which is the sense of hearing. And when it acquires the quality of touch, right, then that object is now tangible. You can feel it. When it acquires the quality of form, right, that means it has a fire element. Then you can not only describe it and feel it, but you can see it. And then similarly, it would acquire the quality of taste and smell, and then becomes a full object. So according to Sankhya, the subtlest form is an idea, and then the name is basically richer, which is name of the idea is a little bit richer because it has another element, which is vocalization. And then when the object fully manifests itself, it can be perceived by all 5 senses. And so the object or a thing is a full manifestation of that subtle idea. And so this is how Sankhya describes. Now there is a difference between, the science says that, well, ideas are derived from things, while Sankhya says that you first have ideas, and those ideas, they become richer in information, they transformed into things. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. But if we have to tell you how do you define 5, right? So going back to the proposition that how ideas exist a priori, or they exist independently, or they are innate, how do you prove that? So here's the question, like in layman's term, if you want to, I don't, we are not mathematicians, so I'm not expecting any complex equations or proof to prove it, but if you have to just define the number 5 or any number for that matter, how would you define it? Say define 5. If you want to give it a try, or approach, like if you want to practically, could be a definition or could be a practical approach to come up with a definition or conclusion of what that fiveness is. Fiveness is not a real term, but I'm just making it up. If 5 was a property, can you think of a way to define what that is?
Can we start with like a very basic, in this case, if we say, I mean, it's an assumption that we have a number like 1 which is already defined, and then we say to get to 5 this is what you do. But that the assumption here is that you have 1 already defined, but then your question can also be turned on 1, like define 1.
Yeah, that could be one question, but let's say, okay, let's see, you know what that 1 is. Okay, let's see 1. Now, okay, 1 is known. How would you define 5?
So if you put 5 ones together.
But the problem is we don't know what 5 is.
Yeah.
That's
So,
what you're trying to define.
I mean, even in maths also, like as Nitin Prabhuji said, we start first from the assumption, right? And then when we get a proof, the assumption becomes a concept. So initially, maybe, I mean, I look at my little one's learning process. So even from the poems, how he learned 5, or how he's learning the numbers. So maybe sometimes they just show a balloon and they say that this is 1 balloon. Then suddenly the second balloon appears and they say that 1 balloon, now another balloon, so 2 balloons. So and that way, from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so they goes to 5. So and now he can count until 20. So he's learning coming from that. So I believe initially we all assume something, and then when we get a proof to that assumption, so that becomes a concrete in our mind, and we get on from that basis.
Yeah, so you're giving names to your child when you're teaching. So you're saying this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If you're teaching in Gujarati, you would say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And for Hindi, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever the language might be. So those are names, and names could be differing in the language. But below the name is the concept of numbers. And it's interesting, how would you teach that concept? Right? You taught him the names of the concept, but the concept itself, if you think about it, you never taught it to your child. Now take that example and try to see if you have to teach it to a computer. If you think of an algorithm, how would you teach it to a computer? Right? What if you have to define 5, for instance, and I have to teach what 5ness is? Well, one way, okay, I'll make an attempt. I mean, typically what they would say is, well, 5ness is a property of any set of any objects which are in count of 5, right? Now you again run into the same problem. Well, you don't know what 5 is. So how would you make sets of 5, right? The similar question that I had asked last time is, well, if you want to teach a computer what a cat is, then it has to extract properties which are unique to cat, right? Also, that means you have to gather all the different breeds of cats which exist in the world. So you make a collection of that. You note down all those properties, right? And then you see what are things which are common across all those breeds of cat. Then once those are determined, then you say, out of those all properties, which properties are unique only to cats and they're not present in dogs, they're not present in donkeys, they're not present in elephants or whatever, right? So now for that, I mean, suppose all of this is possible, that means you're able to collect all the details of all the breeds of cat. Not only that, you have to, because now the exclusion part, you also need details of all other animals, all this, and suppose all of that is available. So let's say there are no practical challenges. We ignore that for a moment. What you run into a problem, the same problem is that you're saying property is unique to cat. That means only present in cat and not in dogs. But then you don't know what cat is to begin with, right? So then how are you going to shortlist properties unique to cat which are not present in dog? Because yet we haven't figured out what a cat is, right? And this brings us to the same problem. That means that the idea should have been existing a priori in your mind. And so the mind is known as a collection or a repository of ideas, that it exists automatically. I mean, they're already there in the mind, they're innate. Now the language or the names might not be, we might not have it, and then the child learns the language. And they associate the name to the concept, but the concept is already existing in the mind. So that is a very radical idea, but you cannot, there is no other way that it is possible. Now their concepts can be learned. But the basic, the basic concepts, they already exist. Now there could be other complex concepts which maybe you say didn't exist in the mind and somebody teaches you, but then that person who taught you would have learned from someone else. And then if you go through that chain of recursion, ultimately you will come to the original creator who created everything. And then this idea or the concept resides in that supreme being. And then it is the concept that led to which got richer in information and it transformed into a name and then further into an object. So this is the premise before I elaborate. Does that make sense? Does anyone have any objections, or you do not agree, or further questions on this? But I think last time also mentioned that you just show a one picture in a picture book with a child, when a child is learning, and you say this is a cat, right? And so you're ascribing a name to that concept. And now that name is ascribed, the child can use that name to communicate with you. Next time the child will see a completely different breed of cat. But it's not going to call that cat a dog. You're able to identify this is a cat, right? You didn't have to teach him. You just showed him one breed of picture, or that he just experienced maybe on a, in a community, somebody has a cat. We come across that first experience of a real cat in this particular body, right? And then, okay, this is a cat. Now, next time we come across a completely different breed of a, it's cat or a dog, whatever, right? If once they identify it, they will be able to identify it. I gave the example of stones. You teach your child, well, this is a stone. Now, stones, they come in all sizes, shapes, color, texture. Sometimes they are alone. Sometimes they are a collection of pebbles. I remember I took my son to the Snoqualmie River, right over here. We have the river, and the riverbed, the small child, and you say, well, he just knew one stone. I just taught him what one stone is. Now they're a collection of stones. He didn't get confused, right? It might appear like a web, right? And it's below the riverbed, right? And they are way bigger in size, and they are more polished. They do not have sharp edges. But then the child related to it, right? You didn't have to teach what that was. So how is that possible? You know, you don't need an image processing software. You know, even see the computer, the artificial intelligence that we talk about. The artificial intelligence is actually human intelligence, which is hard coded. You know, that's why they have this supervised learning, unsupervised learning. You know, when the image processing, how they are doing. You know, when somebody is feeding those images, they come with tags in the sense that, well, this is a cat, this is a dog, right? So you're already telling the computer what that is. So it's a human, and the humans have identified, well, this is a cat, and now you're telling the computer this is a cat. And then you can feed hundreds and thousands and millions of images, right? And then the computer can extract, well, okay, this is all cat, 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 cat. They're all labels as cat. And then now it's going to extract the unique properties, right? And then when it has enough sufficient statistically significant sample sizes across a variety of different breeds of cat, then it has you know, you can comparable accuracy. You can have confidence in the accuracy of its prediction. But when you teach your child, you don't have to expose your child to thousands of species or breeds of dogs before it can start identifying. Well, it doesn't confuse a dog with a cat. Yeah. Did you have to teach your son all the thousands of species of dogs? No. But a computer, unless you do that, it's going to get confused. It needs it's a good variety and good number of samples which exists, right, to be able to derive what is unique for dogs. Then it can tell, well, this is a dog and this is a cat. But a child, you don't have to do that. So how is that? That means that knowledge exists a priori in the mind. You can think about it in detail. If you have any questions right now, or you have a different opinion, you agree, disagree, you can bring it up and share. But all artificial intelligence is hard-coded human intelligence, if at one level. Does it make sense? Yeah.
No, I was saying it makes sense. I think, yeah. So, Prabhuji, are we trying to conclude here by like this discussion that what we are trying to arrive at is any idea or the idea of anything already exists in the mind?
Yes. Yes.
That's the thing that we're trying to get to so that we can move forward.
Yeah. So mind is a repository of ideas, and those ideas exist a priori. They exist in the mind. I mean, the names you might not be, and that's why I was trying to, if you had done this presentation quite some time ago, but over here, so science has this idea where you have physical objects, right? And the objects are real, phenomena are real, and you explain them in scientific theories, and then in order to describe those objects, you might use different names. So names of different objects or phenomena, they're simply random symbols. I can come up with, we call it chair, but I can call it abracadabra, right? And then if a significant population of the world agrees that we want to call chair abracadabra, then it becomes a valid name. You know what I mean? Like, so names are just random symbols, and everyone has as long as everyone has a common understanding of what that symbol is, and they use the same legend to interpret it, then names are just symbols. They don't have any other ablation. And what is concepts? Well, concepts are perception. That means when I perceive that object, either by the name or by my touch, when I feel it, taste it, smell it, it creates a chemical reaction. The neurons, they send signal to the brain, and there is a intricate chemical reaction. And then because of that chemical reaction, in science, there is no concept of mind, at least in terms of mainstream science. And then brain creates this perception, and that perception is what we call it concept. And so according to science, concepts are derived from objects. And that's why if you look at all the physical sciences in the modern science, they mostly talk about what they call primary properties are properties defined mostly in terms of objects, not in terms of how our senses perceive. For instance, science will never say that apple is red. What it would say is that, well, apple reflects light, and then it absorbs all other color, spectrums of light, frequencies of light, except one particular frequency of light, which is reflected and not absorbed. And that frequency of light, when it hits our retina, it creates a particular signal or a neuron signal, which is processed by our brain, and it's our brain that perceives that frequency or wavelength of light as red. And so redness is not a real attribute of apple, but it's simply a perception in our mind. So it's a very completely different outlook of how science looks at things, because then they say, well, because you see somebody might be colorblind or somebody might be hallucinating, so really cannot trust what people's perception are, and so it cannot be standardized. You can only look at things which are standards, not change according to different people's perception. And so all the science, that's why they call taste, smell, touch as secondary properties and not the primary properties. And these are very subjective. So that's the idea of science. But in the Vedic concept, well, you do run into another problem. He says, okay, if concepts are real, not reality, which is what the premise is, then how do you teach science to others? Because in order to teach science, you have to use concepts, right? If this was true, all knowledge, including science, would be unreal. If concepts are an after effect generated in mind, it is possible. Yeah, that's another thing, is that, if it's only an after effect, maybe there are some physical phenomena that does not create any after effect, and that means you can never know it. Anyway, you won't want to into detail, but it runs into another problem. So I talked about three things, right? You have the concepts, you have the names and objects. So here's a paradox. If you look at three sentences, all of them, they use the word nobody. So when you say I am nobody, here nobody refers to the concept of insignificance. That means I am nothing, right? So the way the word is used in the context of the idea of insignificance. The second statement, nobody, has 6 letters. So here nobody is referring to a thing, an object, right? Which means a word which has 6 letters. So here it's a thing. And in the first one, it was a concept, and then nobody is perfect. So here it's referred to a name. It's referring to the entity by which nobody, right? So you have 3 things: your concept, name, and the thing. So in mathematics and science, there is no distinction between, science mostly studies things and phenomena, and the names and concepts, they are not given importance, and that leads to many paradoxes or inconsistencies. For instance, now if you combine the 3 sentences, I am nobody, nobody is perfect, therefore I am perfect. You see, I am nobody and nobody is perfect, therefore I am perfect. So it is a logically correct statement. It is a logically correct statement, but the conclusion is erroneous. Because according to logic, it's correct. A equals B, B equals C, so A is equal C. So I am nobody, nobody is perfect, therefore I am perfect. So logically it is correct. But the fact that it ignores the in this is here nobody is a concept, here nobody is a thing, and here so when you're mixing a concept with a thing, then you come up to an erroneous conclusion. Here's another example. Nobody is perfect and nobody has 6 letters, therefore perfect has 6 letters. Logically correct statement. It's a logical contradiction, because perfect does not have 6 letters, it has 7 letters, right? So when you try to ignore the distinction between concept, names, and objects, one runs into such paradoxes. And so one of the challenges in natural language processing in artificial intelligence is that Now, some of the text editors are really smart in the sense that, they will prompt you what is the next word or the phrase you need to use to complete the sentence, or they will correct a grammar. And the way they achieve that is, it's all hard-coded human intelligence. That means the language, the sentence is composed by humans, and you feed inside a computer, and then there are statistical algorithms which say, well, 90% of the time, generally when the phrase begins with this, it ends in this. And so it's using that to prompt us what should be correct, right? So it's using that collective intelligence from a wide array of texts that is fed into the machine. But the computer itself does not have any volition, and it does not understand what nobody is, right? That's why it does not have any emotions. It does not have any real discrimination. And that's why it's very challenging for artificial intelligence to really identify humor or sarcasm in the sentences. These are emotions, these are feelings. And yeah, so that's just one comment. So anyway, I wanted to introduce the idea that you have concepts, then there are names and objects. So concept is the most subtlest thing. It exists in the mind a priori. Names are basically languages or symbols associated with those concepts, and they're vocalized ideas. So names literally are vocalized ideas, which are perceived by the sense of hearing. A non-vocalized idea cannot be perceived. I don't know what's going in your mind. I mean, maybe your body language might indicate that you're happy or you're morose, but I really don't know what exactly you're thinking, right? Especially if I don't know you or have much context, I can hardly guess. But when you vocalize, I know what's going on. And a vocalized idea, when it becomes richer and the remaining four perceptions, which is perception of touch, form, taste, and smell, and that object fully manifests as and is not simply an idea. So yeah, according to science, concepts exist a priori in the mind, and they are the basis of manifested physical objects and phenomena. How? Well, names, physical objects and phenomena, they're vocalized, right? And they vocalize, they convey ideas. And a lot of these ideas are onomatopoetically conveyed. That means just by hearing the sound, it conveys the sounds, they convey feeling. Just like even if you don't teach your child any language, right? Even when the child is not learned any language, the child can figure out when the sound that is coming, is it a cacophonous sound which is irritating, or is it a sweet voice of one's mother who is calling lovingly, or a sibling who is angry and is shouting, right? And the child is scared. You didn't have to teach them. So when it comes to core emotions, the sound is just like taste. Nobody has to teach you somebody has to teach you the name sour or name sweet, or the name spicy. But the perception, as soon as somebody puts in the mouth the idea of sweetness that is pleasing, or something that is spicy that is irritating, so those concepts, they are already there. One can perceive it. One can similarly sound. The names could be different, but that's why the music. What is music? Sargam. How does, when you play a sargam, even if you're not singing, the sargam itself will evoke different emotions in us. Just by listening a particular piece of music, you can say this is melancholy. It is sad music. Another combination of the same 7 notes could be very exciting music, could convey action, could convey suspense, could convey chivalry. There's so many emotions just by different ragas, just those 7 notes, different combinations. And you don't need, and no one needs any language to, you don't have to go through school to understand it. Even a child, when the sound, they evoke different emotions. So this is all a priori, right? And then you can apply the same to different forms of touch, form, taste, and smell. You see, the idea, the things are getting richer. Your names is only conveyed. Sorry, name is on. Is perceived only through sound, but then you add touch, form, taste, and smell, and it becomes a full object. So according to the Vedic theory, it's the opposite. It says everything starts from a concept. The concepts, when it gets richer, it transforms into name, and name, when it gets richer, it transforms into objects. So it's a science. Did I give you an example of how things? I think I did, right? When you say dehinosmin yathade, how the body is disappearing and reappearing every moment. Did I talk that about?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Yeah. So every moment we are actually just like a TV screen, the frames are refreshing, right? The lights are completely disappearing and reappearing, but it's happening at such a fast rate. It creates the perception of motion on a small screen. So that's a reduced imitation of the real thing that Krishna actually creates in this world, where our bodies are disappearing and reappearing at every moment. That's how aging is happening. That's how motions are happening. And how is that happening? Well, our body is composed of 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, ether. And it is every moment it is reducing sequentially. It's, first the sense of smell goes away, and, it transforms into the earth element completely goes away, and it's reduced to water and subtler elements. Then it loses taste. Then earth and water elements are gone, and now it's reduced to fire, air, and ether. Then it loses form. Then and now only the 2 elements remain, which is air and ether. And then it loses the sense of touch. Now it's only ether. And now when it sequentially again assumes all these properties of touch, form, taste, and smell, and again the matter is formed. But now that matter is formed, it's not exactly the same matter. When the new matter is formed, it is aged more. The cells have aged minutely, not significantly, minutely. At the same time, a motion has occurred. If I'm moving, I was here, now I'm maybe an inch or half an inch of 1 mil away. And so either motion, aging, all of these is happening by the same mechanism. And similarly, at the time of death, it's the same mechanism by which the body is gone and a new body is acquired. The mechanism does not change, but because the change is drastic, we call it as a death. Just like in a movie, if there's a car chase that is happening in Los Angeles, there's a very minute difference between 2 successive frames. But when the car chase is over and there is a major change in scene, so now we are moving from Los Angeles to New York. Now the change is drastic, right? And so all the pixels have changed at the same time. It's not a minute change. And so we call it, well, it's a change in scene, but what is happening technically is the same process by which minute change happened. The same process of refreshing, appearing and disappearing of the frames is the same process by which the entire change in scene has happened. It just appears drastic to us, but technically nothing has changed. And that's why the same thing happens with our body. When there's a drastic change, we call it a death, but it's the same mechanism by which actually our body is dying every moment. It's disappearing and reappearing. When it reappears, it refreshes. It refreshes with a slightly aged. The cells have aged a little bit more. So that's the concept.
Prabhuji, this slide that you are sharing right now, is this also the basis for, I think you had explained that there is no concept of time in the spiritual world?
Yeah, no, what I was saying, in the spiritual world, they say that there is no difference between the name and the object, right? There's no difference between the name and the object. Like Krishna, name of Krishna and the object Krishna are non-different. How? Because in the spiritual world, there is no time. Actually, for name to transform into object, you need time. Because over a period of time, name acquires the quality of touch and transforms into air. Over a period of time, it acquires the quality of form and it transforms into fire. Over a period of time, it acquires the quality of taste and transforms into water. Over a period of time, it further acquires the quality of smell and transforms into earth. And now it is a fully formed object. Now, no doubt that time is very fast. It's it's fractions of a millisecond or even faster. That all these changes are happening, but it's still separated by time. In spiritual world, there is no time. How the time slows down from lower planetary system to Brahma. Brahma's time is slowest, but his time is still moving for Brahma. From our perspective, Brahma's life is 113, trillion years. But for him, it's just 100 years. He doesn't feel like it's a long time. But from Vishnu's perspective, Mahavishnu is breathing out all those universes. For him, Brahma's life is just one breath. So as you go further up, time slows down to the point that when you reach Goloka Vrindavan, the time is still, in the sense that there is no concept of time. Of course, there is this perception of past, present, and future, in the sense that, again, Yashoda Maya is waking up in the morning and, she's doing her activities. But the idea of time is to create lamentation about the past, fear about the future, and illusion of the present. So that is not there. And so time over there does not move synchronously, in the sense that, after morning, afternoon will come, and then evening and night, how it cyclically happens over here. Over there, Krishna says, well, I want to experience the pastime, some pastime in night time of autumn. So it was morning a moment ago, and now it is night. And the season, it was rainy, it was a winter, and now suddenly it's autumn. So it does not move cyclically like the way it moves. And so when the time does not exist, you can say that because there is no time, there is no question of transformation of a name to an object. And so the name and object are in unison. They are non-different. For any spiritual object in spiritual, not just humans or not just Krishna, but all other living entities also. There is no difference between name and the objects. That means you, just by tasting an object, you can perceive what its name is and how does it feel, or how does it look. You say you want, right, because everything is dense just by the taste. As soon as you taste it, all the remaining 5 attributes are known. In this world, it's not possible. If I want to feel, or if I close my eyes and if I eat gulab jambu and say I'm eating it for the first time, I don't know the shape and color of it. But by tasting, it reveals me, or it is a sweet preparation. And in the spiritual world, just by tasting, even if you all other properties are revealed. And so why is that? It's the properties are not successively manifested or unmanifested, separated by time. Does that make sense?
Yes, Prabhuji.
Okay, I think I spoke a lot. I'll take a pause. We spent quite some time, but are there any questions or comments, or if it makes sense, or is just like hocus pocus? I don't know. You can be frank.
Makes sense to me, Prabhuji. I think Mataji wants to say something.
No, I was just going to say, I think it's something that you inherently know, but it's very different when somebody crystallizes it. And I think for me, like today's session is much more about, like, I've known these concepts, but not put the structure to them. So this is just a more structured way for me to think about the concept, the name, the object, because so much of it you take for granted just because of how you learn.
Right.
Or, I mean, and some of these are so fundamental that I don't think you ever think and go back and think about it.
That's true. I mean, I personally never thought it. When I read it, I learned it, right? I mean, no one sits, unless you are those Greek philosophers who want to sit and philosophize what's the difference between a number and
thank you for clarifying it. I think this helps a lot.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. For me also, like, I mean, this theory of gravity would have existed, but like one of the scientists realized by that falling apple, and then it came into existence for us, that we realize and we become conscious about it. So I think I mean, overall, the entire process for us, like, even we are communicating with you, and like everyone else is sharing their examples, and also, so we just look at ourselves, and I mean, day by day we know ourselves more, and then we know that okay, yeah, we are existing, and then how you look at the world and how you handle the situation. So, in a broader aspect.
Yeah, and yeah, all of that is correct. I mean, the thing is, it's such an intricate, subtle creation of the Lord. You know, it is no way for us to understand it on our own. But if somebody explains it, then we can understand. And that somebody explaining it has to learn again. Ultimately, the knowledge comes from Krishna. You know, it's we have our own limitation. We cannot ever figure it out by our own experimentation. Because, for instance, we say I want to figure out what mind is, or intelligence says I want to empirically determine that using scientific principle of observation. I'm going to use tools, sophisticated tools, to determine the existence of mind and intelligence. If it exists, can I prove it? Forget about soul. We're not even talking about soul. So, you have the mind, and then subtler than mind is intelligence. Subtler than intelligence is ego. Subtler than ego is the soul. So we are separated by 4 layers. Let's talk about mind. And at least science has some idea, not at least the science of the branch of psychology, which is not, some people dispute if that's a real science, but at least there is some delving into that branch. The problem that soon you will run into is that the subtlest types of sensors that we have to probe things are the sensors which can sense the element of ether. So when you talk about electromagnetic radiation, the radio waves, or so that's all in the medium of ether. Now ether, it describes sound or a signal, right? So when we're all in different parts of the world, and I'm speaking, all of these is transmitted through satellites via ether, and the sound is traveling through that media. So this is all vocalized thoughts. It's in my mind, I'm vocalizing it, and it's being transmitted, and you receive at the other end. But when you talk about mind, as I defined, mind is a repository of unvocalized ideas. That means it is subtler than the element of ether. Mind is by definition subtler than ether, and the subtlest sensors that we have are on an ethereal platform. So by definition, you cannot empirically determine the existence of mind. No one's ever going to be able to find a sensor by which you can sense the mind. You can perceive mind by the fact that the ideas exist. You can perceive the existence of intelligence by experiencing that all of us have a discriminatory ability, that we can discriminate between things. That's the only way you can prove the existence of intelligence. There is no sensor by which you can, because by definition, you don't have any sensor which is subtler than ether. The existence of ego can be proven by observing that in this world, everyone is acting in their self-interest. They are all talking about in terms of I, me, and mine. By that, we know that the ego exists. So you see, as the medium, as the domain changes, the instruments that we use to probe those entities should also change. You cannot use the same tools to perceive a domain of knowledge that is drastically different. Okay, so how does this all relate to topic of conversation? Well, I thought that maybe we should understand what mind is. Then we talk about how lust conquers mind, and so mind is a strategic position, and so mind is a repository of ideas. Now all these ideas that they exist because of mind's association with intelligence, who in turn is associated with ego, right? And when the ego thinks, the false ego thinks in terms of me, mine, I, me, and mine, right? And it ignores the soul. The soul is covered by the false ego. And so the identity of the soul is not known. And then I identify myself with a particular gender, race, different designations, positions in the society, whatever, right? And I want to act in my self-interest based on that false identity. And because intelligence is the immediate neighbor of that false identity, now the intelligence is also polluted. And so now when intelligence makes a discrimination, it will discriminate not for the interest of the soul, because the idea of soul is not existing. What is existing is the false ego, who is an ex-neighbor. And so now intelligence will say that what is best for the false identity that the ego has assumed. You see? So the intelligence is now that sitting place of lust. That intelligence is corrupted, is overcome by lust because of intelligence's association with the false ego. Now the immediate next neighbor of intelligence is the driver. And driver is thinking that I'm serving the passenger behind me, and he's thinking the passenger is, if the passenger identifies oneself with the body, that's a false identity, but then intelligence will serve that false identity. Now the next neighbor is the mind, which are the reins which the driver is holding. And mind, because of its association with intelligence, which is now corrupted, the mind, which is a repository of ideas, is associating those ideas again in the self-interest of the false ego. So that means when you see anything nice, something sweet, say, let's say I want to eat something and say gulab jamu. I've been given this example many times. How this is going to satisfy my tongue. Instead of thinking how it's going to satisfy the tasting propensity of Krishna, I'm thinking in terms of how it's good for me. So now that idea is there, but that idea I'm thinking in terms of my enjoyment, because now mind is also overcome by lust. Any form that I see, the mind has that idea of the form, but again in relationship of how it's useful for my own gratification. And same thing for smell or touch or you name it. So all these ideas or any concept that they exist, the mind is conquered by lust. The mind will think immediately in terms of one's own gratification. And similarly, the senses are naturally attracted to the sense objects. And now the senses, because of association with mind, which has been conquered by lust, the senses in turn also get conquered by lust. And so when the immediate sensory reaction, whenever a sense organ comes in contact with a sense object, is also thinking of immediate gratification. That's as opposed to someone who is completely spiritualized, is self-realized. When they come in contact with the sense object, they are simply perceiving the existence of God in that, either as a prasadam or a remnant, how this thing is pleasing to Krishna. That's how they would think. Like in the 10th chapter, we'll learn Vibhuti Yoga, in which it says, Krishna describes that anything that you see in the world, you will see my opulence is there. For he says, for instance, among the fishes, I am shark. Among the mountains, I am the Himalayas. Among the sound, I am the sound of Oms. In this way, he keeps on describing. Among the taste, I am the taste of water, right? So when somebody is self-realized, their senses, when they come in contact with sense object, they are simply perceiving the presence, the vibhuti of Krishna. So it's a completely different way. But when it is conquered by lust, we are thinking of gratification of the senses, how it's pleasing to me. And we don't see the presence of the supreme in those things. So in this way, the lust has conquered important strategic positions in this city of 9 gates. Another example, so I explained senses, I explained how the mind, and so mind, as I say, is a repository of ideas. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, who is a spiritual master, guru, Srila Prabhupada, he said that, I have an important work that is unfinished. I don't know, and it's so important that I'll come again, to finish it. And what that work was, he wanted to write a spiritual dictionary. What he really meant is that when you open any dictionary, the meanings of the words are described, but those meanings are again in terms of how the corrupt mind perceives it. And we, those meanings, when we hear, we think of how those meanings of objects as they would gratify my desires, right? And so you wanted to elaborate on each of those meanings and see how each of those objects or the ideas of those objects are actually meant for Krishna's enjoyment. So it's an just to emphasize the point that we are not the primary enjoyers. So you just wanted to make that point. So by default, what we think as normal is in terms of our gratificatory propensity, because the mind has been conquered by lust. So that's the point I wanted to say. And intelligence also I described. The intelligence, instead of discriminating in the interest of the soul and super soul, the corrupt intelligence, which is conquered by lust, is going to think in the interest of the false ego. And so in Srimad Bhagavatam, is an example that is used, an extreme example, you can say, but the intelligence which is conquered by lust is compared to a prostituted intelligence. And what it means by that is that intelligence is not stable. Stable intelligence means I will always decide in the interest of soul or super soul. Discriminate what is good for service of Krishna. That is stable intelligence. Or that is a chaste intelligence. Chaste intelligence means just like a chaste wife is always dedicated to one's husband. On the other hand, if the intelligence is not chaste, then it wants to serve the interest of different senses. Today it wants to serve the eyes. Tomorrow it wants to serve the next moment, not even tomorrow, next moment it wants to serve the tongue, next moment it wants to serve the nose, next moment it wants to serve the ears. Sometimes it wants to serve all the five senses at the same time, right? And so the intelligence is not chaste. It wants to satisfy different masters. And what happens is that the other analogy that is given is that when the intelligence is not chaste, it has to assume different bodies, right? Because the desires are unlimited. Well, in the next life, we'll get a different biological body that will be more suitable for satisfying the need of a particular sense organ. And the next life, a completely different body to satisfy the desires of another sense organ. Just like a prostitute, she changes different kind of dresses to attract different kind of men. As opposed to someone who is chaste, she's always, she doesn't change. She's always wearing clothes for the pleasure of Krishna, the deities, or one's husband. But the intelligence that is not chaste, is conquered by lust, has to assume different dresses in terms of different biological bodies. So that's a metaphor that is used in Srimad Bhagavatam to describe what happens when the lust is intelligence is conquered by lust, and it has to assume different kind of dresses in terms of biological bodies. So now you see, when the lust has conquered all these strategic positions, what happens? The real knowledge of the living entity is covered, and the living entity is fully bewildered. So this is our situation, and the situation is very grave. It's very serious. So when those strategic positions have been captured, so in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says that, see, look, the enemy has captured different strategic positions in the body of the conditioned soul. And therefore, Lord Krishna is giving hints of those places so that one who wants to conquer the enemy may know where he can be found. Mind is the center of all activities of the senses. And thus, when we hear about sense objects, the mind generally becomes a reservoir of all the ideas of sense gratifications, you see. This is the situation when the mind is conquered by lust. But when the mind is completely spiritualized, it's not thinking of one's own sense gratification. The same ideas will come. But immediately mind relates, oh, it's like that spiritual dictionary. The meanings, the idea is the same, but the mind understands, oh, this is all for Krishna's enjoyment. When you see a beautiful girl, he says, oh, this is a beautiful gopi, Krishna's maid servant. So one does not lust upon seeing that beautiful form. So there is a difference between a mind which is conquered by lust as opposed to one that is not conquered. So as a result, the mind and the senses, they become repositories of lust. Next, the intelligence department becomes a capita of such lustful propensities. So by association, everyone becomes corrupt. So the corruption happens from top to bottom and bottom to top, both ways. The feedback loop exists both ways. And the ego, false ego, corrupts the intelligence, which corrupts the mind, which corrupts the senses, and vice versa also. It's a feedback loop. And then the senses, as they become more mature in lust, and it again influences the mind, which influences the intelligence. Both ways it works. So intelligence is the immediate next door neighbor of the spirit soul. The lusty intelligence influences the spirit soul to acquire the false ego and identity itself and identify itself with matter. So now the real knowledge of our existence as spirit soul is completely gone, and we think, well, we have this body and we are supposed to enjoy this body. Well, you live and die only once, so while we live, enjoy the most, for when you are dead, everything is destroyed. So this is the philosophy of those who are deluded. The spirit soul becomes addicted to enjoying the material senses and mistakes this as true happiness. This false identification of the spirit soul is nicely explained in Srimad Bhagavatam. It's a very famous verse. It's often devotees recite this. Yasya atma buddhi kunapetri dhatu ke svadiha kalatradi subhoma ijyadi yatra tirtha buddhi salile nana karhichit janeshu avigyeshu shaiva gokharaha. A human being who identifies his body made up of the three elements with his self. So what are the three elements by which the body is made? Kapha, Pitta, and Vayu. So mucus, bile, and air. So these are the three elements. If we analyze the body as per Ayurveda, this body is composed. Of course, another way you can say, break it down into 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, ether. But the kaph, what is kaph? Kaph is earth and water, the grossest elements. Earth and water combined makes mucus. What is pitta? Pitta is bile, fire and water.
Water.
Right? Water. So bile is liquidy, but it says fiery also. Bile juice in the stomach, the acid, which is combination of water and fire. Then what is air? So yeah, water maybe, but mostly air and ether. So maybe you can say, if you consider moisture, maybe some water particles in the air. So yeah, you can say maybe a little bit of water, but a lot of air and ether. So again, kapha, pitta, vayu are also composed of the 5 elements. So this body is made up of the 3 elements with this self, who consider, and one who considers the byproducts of the body to be one's kinsman. Once we identify with the body, what happens? We think I am the body, then we say, what are the extensions of my body? Say my extensions of my body are my children, right? And so then say that, this is just extension of me, my kinsman, one who considers the land of birth worshipable. He says the greatest place in the world is the place of from where I belong. You take anywhere in the world, people, the identification with one's birthplace is so strong that it's very difficult to overcome. A lot of wars, sometimes over generations, they keep on going because of the strong identification. And one who goes to the place of pilgrimage simply to take bath, go to Gangotri, Yamunotri, go to Varanasi, just take a dip in the water. That is spirituality. You don't need to understand knowledge or you need to practice anything, just simply a dip. So they go to those spiritual places, but rather than meet men of transcendental knowledge. So a lot of spiritual, all these holy places, they also attract holy men. And so traditionally, when people go, I mean, taking bath is one thing, but the idea is you learn something from the sadhus. Of course, nowadays it's even difficult to find transcendental knowledge, and there would still be people. You cannot say no one exists, but it's not easy to find. I mean, you know, you will find a lot of people in all these pilgrimage places which have no idea of what spiritual knowledge is, though they might claim to be sadhus. But anyway, the idea that just take a bath and that's, but no interest in really understanding what the spiritual knowledge is. They are simply considered like an ass or a cow, or in other words, an animal, right? Because all their activities are on a bodily platform. All their identification is on a bodily level, and even when they take up spirituality, it is at a very bodily level. Is that you know, just external rituals, or just the fact that I just need to take a dip in water, and you know, that's my pilgrimage. Well, you know, there are so many fishes in Ganga. There are dolphins, and then there are so many animals who take bath in Ganga. And of course, Ganga is holy. There's no doubt. One does get, you know, one's sins are definitely, you know, eroded. So I'm not saying that's not true. But then that cannot be the ultimate or end in itself. One has to take up spiritual life beyond that. Otherwise, animals also, you know, they go in the river and, you know, they take a bath, but doesn't mean that, you know, they have become spiritually realized. Okay, so this is sum and substance of this particular verse, and we spend quite some time discussing this, but I hope that was worth it. I'll take a pause for any questions or comments.
One question, Prabhuji, where does, like, in one of the previous sessions you talked about, like, when false ego comes in contact with goodness, mind is formed. With I think passion, intelligence is formed, and then with ignorance, I think it was contaminated consciousness.
Consciousness, yes.
So
yeah.
So where does, like, how does lust come? Like, what is the origin of lust? Like, how does Srimad Bhagavatam describe, like, in the process of creation, that is where lust starts to come in the picture?
Yeah, I mean, the reason of our existence in this world is, you can say, is lust. Lust is the beginning of our existence over here. And maybe you can think of this. So the creation, when it's describing the creation, it's describing the entities, right? The mind, intelligence, egos. So, you know, those are systematically created. And the lust comes from the fact that we want to enjoy independently of Krishna. And so then the soul acquires or is covered by false ego. So in the 24 elements, creation of 24 elements, there is no way, the soul is still not described over there. We're still talking about how the arrangement of the matter is put into place to create that subtle body, which would be layered upon the soul who has developed lust. And then, you know, when that lust is, as soon as that idea becomes manifest, then these instruments, you know, the mind, intelligence, ego, and the contaminated consciousness, you know, they facilitate the further activities based on that. And then, you know, that lust then manifests across all those elements, if that makes sense.
Yes, so basically what you're saying is lust was always there, coming with the soul as it tries to enjoy.
Yeah, the origin of lust, you can say, is the misuse of free will. One of the qualities of the soul is that it has free will. free will either to serve Krishna or not to serve him, or to enjoy independently of Krishna. The enjoyment is there in the spiritual world. Their enjoyment is in association of Krishna, but when by misuse of free will, the soul might decide I want to enjoy independently of Krishna. That means why Krishna, why I just want to satisfy my own senses independently of Krishna's satisfaction, and that is the beginning of lust. And so when the desire develops, then these are the false ego, mind, intelligence, and tools. They are simply instruments which facilitate that lust to manifest and to be acted upon.
Got it, Prabhuji. One unrelated question, Prabhuji. Once at the temple, one of like visitors who they used to come for Sunday feast, they once asked me, like, and there's this mention of cow here, so that reminded me, like, why is there so much focus from like the ISKCON on cows, and why would Krishna love cows more than any other animal? Like, what is so special about cows that there's so much focus from Krishna himself on cows, and then again from us?
Okay. By the way, the word cow or ass that is referred over here, go is cow and khara is an ass. Here it's not used in the context of any holy significance as such,
Yeah.
but the fact that a cow is not an intelligent animal. I mean, cow is worshipable, but cow does not have a intelligence of superior discrimination, and so in that sense it's considered to an animal. Now coming back to your original question of what is the significance of cow and why Krishna likes it. Of course, at one level you can say, well, Krishna is a person, he has his own choices and likes and dislikes, but Krishna lives in a village in the spiritual world, Goloka Vrindavan. His residence is a village. He's a cowherd boy, a simple cowherd boy in a village where everyone just loves him and nobody knows he's God. Neither he wants to be recognized as God. As soon as you identify him with God, then the awe and reverence comes, and then the friendship and parental affection, all that goes away. And when you live in a village, and you're not a hunter. One is not a. The profession is living. It's a civilization, and it's a civilization not based on machinery, right? It's a civilization that is living simply. And in such a civilization, one needs subsist on grains. The grains are cultivated in farming. When for cultivating grains, you need to plow, and for plowing, you need the bull. Bull represents dharma. The four legs of the bull represent the four principles of dharma: austerity, cleanliness, mercy, and truthfulness. The four pillars of dharma. And the cow is the mother in the sense that for growing grains, once you need to till the land, right? And tilling the land, you need bull, but then you also need rain. And the rain comes from sacrifice. Like you can say irrigation, right? Okay, I'll build a dam. That's a human endeavor. I'll drill a hole in the in the earth, and then I'll take the water out from aquifer. Well, that's not sustainable in the long term. Like when the colonials arrived, or the Europeans arrived in this land, and they were expanding westward to the new frontiers, and they came across the mighty Colorado, which goes into the Baja California basin in the Mexico, right? The untamed Colorado, right? So huge, so majestic, going through the canyons, Grand Canyon, and all the rough terrain of the West. And no one could tame it. And then they built the Hoover Dam, and Lake Mead was created. And then all the cities in California exploded, Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada. And they exploited so much water. Now Lake Mead is the lowest water level ever in the history. And it's not sustainable. Eventually it will run dry like other rivers in the world. And so, well, you cannot, for irrigation you need rain. It's the only sustainable way. And rain comes from sacrifice. The rains are controlled by demigods. So demigods, when they bestow us rain, now in order to please the demigods, of course demigods are working under the agency of Krishna. But then one has to perform sacrifice. We learned in this chapter itself, right? The whole cycle of sacrifice. Annat bhavanti bhutani parjanyad anna sambhava yagyat bhavanti parjanya yagyakaram samudbhavam. Yagya comes from prescribed duties which are offered in sacrifice. So all the Vaishyas and in general others also, when they perform that fire sacrifice, the key ingredient for fire sacrifice is ghee. Ghee is produced from butter. Butter is produced by churning of yogurt. Yogurt is produced from milk. And cow is the only animal which is able to provide milk in sufficiently large quantities, and it only consumes little hay, which is insignificant hay, and it provides so much milk like a mother. Cow is the only animal whose even dung and urine is pure. Right, I mean the cows goes in the field, not the bull dung. Bull dung is no good, but that's why in English they say BS, or in Indian languages they say Sande gobar. Sand gobar is no good. The cow's gobar is especially pure. The urine is pure, and when the cow they go and drop their dung in the fields, it's a natural manure, and this is a technique used by millions of years, but somebody in the West, they just recently discovered, he said, I'm spending hundreds and thousands of dollars on fertilizers, but he realized that if I just leave the cows to go around in the field and drop their dung, my land is naturally fertilized. So that was a discovery for him, but people have been doing that for millions of years. And they also use cow dung patties for fuel, right? And so many other use you can use for the huts. And so cow is very important. And cow is the only animal which there is no wild species of cows. Like you use horses, right? And there are domesticated horses, but the horses, they exist in the wild. You have wild elephants, and you have domesticated elephants that are used for armies and in the wars and things like that. You have wild camels and domesticated camels, but there are no wild cows anywhere. And so cow is an animal which needs once to be sheltered and to be protected. It's a very useful animal. And so it's not, people think of this, Hindus are sentimental, they worship cow. But of course, cow is holy in the sense that all demigods reside in it. But more than that, the real utility in the Varnashram Dharma of cow is that it is a utilitarian animal. Without cow, human civilization cannot exist sustainably over a long period of time. A civilization that destroys cows or slaughters cows is bound to perish in due course of time. It's not a sustainable society. And so it's not a sentimental attachment, at least for a human society. And so Krishna is establishing that point. And of course, he's a person and he has his likes and he loves the cow. And so, in that sense, there is an emotional component for Krishna. Of course, we are not dry people, and so we have emotions. But it's not simply emotions. There is a utilitarian principle, and it's an important animal for human society to exist.
Got it, Prabhuji.
Long answer, but I hope that answers. There's a lot of elements, yeah. Okay, any other questions? I know we are already up on time. You only discuss one verse, but I think this was good discussion.
Yes, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, some time back you had talked about, like you touched upon that today as well, like how, when fire is removed, this happens. When water is removed, this happens. You had touched upon this. I think when we were starting the classes as part of introduction or sometime. Is this somewhere, like, have you written a blog or something about this? Because this is also a very deep subject.
I mean, it's described in Bhagavatam, I think the third canto, where it says how the creation happens in a systematic fashion, how ether, you can logically understand. I mean, it's not very difficult. because ether you can only perceive by sound, right? Ether you cannot touch it, you cannot feel it. Air you can touch it. So when ether acquires the quality of touch, it transforms into air. Now air you can describe in words, so that means air is perceived both by touch and by words. But air you cannot see it, you cannot smell it, you cannot taste it. The smell is the earth particles which are mixed. It's not the air itself that has a smell. But when the air acquires the quality of form, it transforms into fire, and fire is the first element that you can see with your eyes. And then fire, you can feel it because it's hot, you can see it, and then you can describe it in words. But you cannot smell fire or you cannot taste fire. The smell is again the smoke, which is earth particles, right? And when so fire is perceived only by 3 senses. When the fire acquires the quality of taste, it transforms into water. It's water, but water you cannot smell it. Sometimes water smells because earth particles are mixed. It's not the water itself. When water acquires the quality of smell, it transforms into earth. And then the deduction also happens in the same fashion. I think the reducing process is described, I believe, in the 11th canto of Bhagavatam. But it's logically still the same, like the way you add is the way you subtract.
Okay.
I can share the specific reference if you want, but it's there in the Bhagavatam.
I'll go find Prabhuji.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, if there are no more questions, we'll conclude today's class. We'll continue from verse 41 next time. Hope you have a good long weekend. Hope you get some time to relax, unwind, and I'll see you all next week. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji.